Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Guy Lehman. Guy is an experienced data strategist and chief data officer, having held roles and positions in lots of organizations, which I will let him explain. But Guy is part of the Cynozure team as well, working on some of our customers. But he's here to talk about and help us talk through delivering value, but importantly, bringing along your organization with you, which is not as always as easy as it sounds. But Guy, welcome along to the show. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Jason, thank you for the invite. Really happy to be here, actually, and love the series that you and the team put together. And a special call out for the one that this week for International Women's Day. I thought that was terrific. So thank you for the invite. And this is a great topic and happy to chat about it.
Brilliant. Well, let's get into the topic in a moment, but yeah, let's talk about you and your background first, because I think it's nice to introduce sort of where you've come from and the experiences that you've had. So yeah, do you want to summarize that for us?
Sure. I think it's a great question, and I usually answer this differently every time I do
Always
this.
comes out
But
differently, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
one thing I would say is, there's no degree for the world of data, right? And so it's usually one that everybody has a very interesting path as far as how they got into this. For me, it actually happened really early in my career. So leaving uni had a degree in computer science and finance. My first project was around creating a market to arbitrage airline tickets. And
Right.
so this was basically buying and then selling those in the marketplace. And from that point forward, I saw the value of data and the ability to unlock it and the ability to do just crazy things out in the marketplace with information. And so that was early in my career. That was before you had the concept of a CDO, right? This is where things like data governance were maybe part of financial services because they needed that type of capability, but really nascent. And so
Right.
as my career progressed, I really was involved govern it, govern it, and ultimately how to create value from that data. And so, because of my background and having done this for 30 years almost, or I guess 30 years, I've worked in lots of different sizes of companies. So everything from startups to the Fortune 1. I've been in lots of different industries. So financial services, business risk, defense, healthcare, manufacturing. And I've seen fundamentally the challenges are very, very similar across these industries when it comes to data.
Yeah.
I've also worked around the world as well. So lots and lots of different markets. And that's been fun to understand the differences and nuances and opportunities there. And from a role perspective, have had a variety of different roles. I think a survey recently said that there are about 500 different titles for CDOs. And so I've had lots of roles
You've had
around taking.
499 of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it
Yeah.
feels like it. And also managing different team sizes. So from
Yeah.
0 to 700. So I've got a really
Right.
diverse background. And what I've learned is I like to come in and I like to build data organizations, get them off and running, and then do a rinse and repeat. And so that's what I love doing. That's my past several roles. Honeywell, Walmart, in healthcare, a company called Vitals have done the same thing. And now I'm doing consulting, which I love. And so, as you've introduced me as, and so, anyhow, I've sort of taken my very diverse background and figured out what I enjoy doing, which is problem solving and doing new things. And sort of that's been my career.
Nice. Well, I think when you have that kind of breadth across size, industry, countries, roles, background, I think as you say, you do get this kind of sense that there are ways of making progress, there are ways of getting success, but culture gets, particularly when you go to different countries, culture gets, I was going to say in the way, but it shapes what you do and how you do it and how you need to think rather than get in the way. But that experience across all those things really helps to kind of find out what works and what doesn't, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. In fact, it's interesting. I remember listening to you about a year ago when you talked about there's many ways to do this, but what's the right way for your company? That's where the magic is,
Mm.
right? Because you need to adopt and listen and understand what's the path forward in the environment that you're in.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you remember that actually, because lots of companies we talk to are always looking for the answer that they can just learn from elsewhere. But actually, there's some real skill in working out what's right for this organization in this context, in this time period, for what's happening right now, for the strategy that I have more broadly in the business. Not cookie cutter, basically. Yeah. Great. Well, look, we want to talk about value. I want to talk about how you sort of think about value, how we need to go about identifying where it is, how we go about delivering it, and importantly, as I mentioned at the start of this, how you bring your organization along with you through the kind of early stages of thinking about value, and then when you're delivering it. So, I just sort of kick off with a broad kind of concept of value, and how you've seen that play out, how you've seen the kind of definition of value and the execution, the delivery of value playing out in some of the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, terrific. And maybe I'll refer to a survey that I read recently, done by MIT, where they surveyed CDOs. And within this survey group, 25% were in their role for 5 years or more, and 25% were 1 year or less. Okay. And the balance obviously was the rest of the math. And within that group, they said 62% of the folks were really unsure of how to describe the value they're bringing to the organization. And so if you take out the 25% that probably have learned how to do that because they've been there for 5 years, you realize this is a really hot topic for businesses.
Yeah.
And I've learned this the hard way, right, over my career, which is, you need to learn how to talk about value, not from a data or tech perspective, which is typically how a lot of people approach it, but you need to talk about it from a business perspective. And so what are you going to do, and why is that going to provide value to the business? And so as I talk about this, I also am very, very well grounded in the fact that you need data governance, right? You need good data management. You need to manage data rights. You need to manage quality. And so this conversation isn't about that, but those are both two sides of the coin, right? To drive value, you also need to make sure that you're doing so in a way that's sustainable and in a way that's responsible. And so now talking about purely the value side, it's really around understanding, as you said, get into the company, understand what their challenges are, and really understand sort of the levers that you need to pull on to create your value story. And so usually it's around things that people are saying, great, let's put in some new AI and we're going to make a zillion dollars, right? There's lots of ideas out there, right? So the challenge is, how do you understand the environment you're in? How do you understand the speed at which the organization can change? And then how do you put your story into words that just ooze business value, right? So you want revenue, direct or indirect revenue, for example. You want to do risk reduction. What's the value to that risk reduction? You want to do things that drive efficiencies, right? What's the value to that? And that's really, when I talk about driving value, when I talk about data, I always lead with those words, because that is usually a harmonizing language across all of your audience. And so that's really a large part of this, is how do you understand what you can get done in the organization, and then what's the right way to position the value you're driving. Again, along comes on the ride is things like data governance, things like data management practices, and things of that nature as well.
Yeah, I mean they enable you to deliver value, right? So I think they're an important part of this. But I like that phrase you used, value story, the value story. I like that. That's just explain that a bit more.
Yeah. So what are you doing and why? And so I'll give you an example. I was talking to the CEO of a very, very large company, and we're going in there to talk about funding some data governance work. And I did not lead with that. I talked about, here's what we are doing to drive value in the business. We are doing this particular capability that's going to reduce some brand risk, for example. We are doing this. It's like actually going to help you gain insights to your customers. And along with that, we're also building out some of the governance that we need, data catalog, the policies and procedures, and all these other things to help support that. And that was the story. And I actually was very overt with him. And it was actually a sort of a funny conversation, very powerful guy, right? And so I said, look, I wouldn't come to you and ask for money for data governance, because I realized You have got a lot of folks that are looking for funding right now. And you want to fund governance, you want to do things the right way, but is that really going to rise to the level in which it's going to get the attention that that it needs? And so I need to position this in a way where I'm actually showing the real external value of doing this versus saying this is something that you need to do because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so understanding that story is key. And by the way, this isn't something that you do on your own, right? Data is a team sport, whether you like it or not. You can come in and make change, but your ability to get stakeholders engaged, get your story together, and show the transformation that you're bringing is really key in this journey. And that's part of the story as well, which is, hey, I've got these business partners I'm supporting. And oh, by the way, they've engaged. We have shared goals, as an example. As I'm doing work with business partners, they actually are sharing with me, this is the impact. And oh, by the way, we're going to make sure it gets adopted, right? So you need to own that, more of that end-to-end process that people typically aren't comfortable doing. So it's about the story, and it's about the fact that you've enrolled the organization to help move this forward.
Yeah. Have you tend to find that people are more interested in different types of value than others? So, you talked about those sort of three categories, revenue, risk, and cost, essentially. And I guess at different times, different companies are interested in different things. But yeah, is it always, about upside? Is it always about cost? Is it always about risk? Which one of those do people tend to get a little bit more behind?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is it depends on the company. It depends on maybe the time at the company. Are they in an expansion mode or restriction mode? And also depends upon some of the external pressures that they might be feeling as well. Yeah. And so usually it's a combination of those. And so I think as the role of a CDO, you're not just there to ring the cash register, right? You've got to think about, how do I do something in a sustainable way? How do I get rid of some of our tech debt, our data debt, things like that as well, that are less sexy, right? And sometimes you need to make that part of the story, but that's not the call out, right? Yeah. And so the idea is, and I would argue it's each one of those, right? You want to show areas that you're driving efficiency, right? You want to show areas that you're reducing risk, and you want to show areas that you are directly or indirectly driving revenue.
Yeah.
And if you have that sort of bunch of ideas in your story, then as you're presenting this, right, if you're talking to the CFO, that is a different conversation, right? Because they're going to understand the risk side, right? And that's important to them, but they want to hear definitely more about, hey, cost management and your ability to actually do this. Many companies have gone down this path and they've struggled, right? And so, CFOs can be great partners, right? But they want to see that money is well spent, and they want to know the impact of that. And they can be the most creative and supporting partners out there. Where somebody in marketing is going to have a different, vantage point, right? They're going to be thinking of customer and growth and retention. And then you've got folks like legal and compliance, right? They are incredible partners for you, right? And they're going to be looking at this and saying, I want to lean more on understanding, the risk and reduction of risk, because, oh, by the way, I've got things that I'm dealing with right now that are challenges. And so each one of those is almost a different story, right? Yeah. Along your greater strategy. And each one of those also has a slightly different, maybe example of how you create a value prop. And if you maybe as an example for that, for Walmart, right? Big company, right? Fortune 1, over 600 billion in revenue, big company. When I joined there, my role was to build out the data strategy and build out the data organization. I was a team of myself when I joined, which is rather shocking for people to hear when you have a company that's 2.4 million associates. But they obviously are a successful company. They obviously do a great job in many areas of data, but they just have never been well coordinated across the expanse of the company. And so my role was to come in there and actually create this. And so across those different attributes of revenue, cost saving, and risk, one of the things was around, wow, we have to do enterprise data policies, procedures, and also train a lot of people.
Mm.
And that is an expensive, expensive endeavor for a company of that size. And by the way, it takes mind share, right? You
Yeah.
want to get people involved. And so the business case that we created there was really around brand reputation, right? And brand risk.
Right. Right.
And the concept of saying, hey, let's do scenario planning. If in fact this happened, how would this affect the brand? And so for a company that's got a lot of brand momentum, like Walmart and name recognition, those are ways to fund and get attention around something
Yeah.
that is very different than saying, let's actually, build out a team to drive a pure revenue play. And
Yeah.
so you need to be creative. You need to think about things that are outside of your, sort of traditional vantage point, and you need to enroll the right stakeholders to help support this, and also drive that intestinal fortitude that you need to get something going in an organization. That's why I'm saying it's a team sport.
Yeah. How much is this about the data function, the data team, the CDO, the people responsible for data, if you like, extracting what value, identifying what value is possible versus sort of receiving it, from,
Yeah.
you talked about the CFO, talked about the CMO, receiving it. So you talk about being creative and finding value, but is this about the CDO or the data function unearthing what the value is, or is it much more about understanding and discussing and identifying from stakeholders what value they're trying to deliver?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say it's a combination of things in the best scenario, which is many companies have lots of terrific ideas. They need somebody to help shine a light on it, and also maybe drive some momentum in that case. So, and then others, you can come in and look at it and say, wow, you know what? I know they need to do these things because I've done this elsewhere and I can bring that to bear.
Yeah.
That said, I would say that intellectual curiosity is a huge part of this role. Humility is a big part of this role. You don't come in there and talk about flying cars, right? And saying we're going to all of a sudden go to here. We're going to be a digital native, right? Next year. That doesn't happen. Even digital natives have a lot of these challenges as well.
Mm.
Come in, be an active listener, meet with the stakeholders, understand the problems, some of which might be unique to a particular group, but sometimes you'll see a thread and say, wow, this actually affects 10 different groups,
Mm.
right? So
Connect
how
some
do I
dots.
connect the dots? How do I enroll people at the same time for support? And then also, how do I lend some of my expertise to say, you know what? I use a term here that an old mentor of mine used, which is pave the cow path. You just don't want to automate a process that's not great.
Mm.
That's where a CDO can also come in with their team and others to say, look, I see this problem. Let's actually leapfrog it, right? And this is where we can get to that actually solves your problem, but also positions you better for the future.
Mm.
And so I'd say it's a combination of all of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because there's the upfront working out where the most value might be. You've talked
Yeah.
about there, engage with stakeholders, understand the priorities, pull out what's important, and then work on those. And then there's the kind of getting on with the work that you do.
Yeah.
And often that there can be a disconnect between the work that is done in data and the value that's trying to be delivered. And there's lots of different reasons why that happens, and
Mm-hmm.
some are on purpose and some are by mistake. But yeah, how have you, or what's your sort of experience and thoughts around how you make a proper connection between the work that you do as a data team, as a data function, and the value that's delivered either by you or indirectly, to make sure you've sort of got those two worlds combined?
Yeah. I've learned this through going through a lot of pain and scars, right? So what I'm
Okay.
telling you is based on a lot of experience where I've tried it different ways. I push very, very hard on the value side. Any project I'm doing, I, institute thinking within the team and the broader team to say, what is the output of this? What is the behavior that's going to change, or what is the direct or indirect value that we are going to create? Um, you get a lot of inbound, right? CDOs, when they come in many cases, great, they're going to change the world. We're going to be in this great place in a year. They get a lot of feedback and a lot of ideas from folks, some
Mm.
of which are really terrific and you want to get going on. Some you look at it and say, look, it's not worth the isn't worth the squeeze on this, right? And
Mm.
so your ability to say no is really key in this case, right? To say this is not something that we need to do right now. But the ability then to sort of distill the areas there that are most important that you want to get going on are key. And with that, that concept of holding your partners accountable to giving you a number is really, really important. It's time that's well spent up front. It's hard. I've been in situations where business partners have said, that's not your business, right? I'm telling you I need this and there's a lot of value. You need to be comfortable and you need to build that relationship to say, look, let me help figure out what the value is, because that's going to also help me prioritize or, do something a little bit different here.
Mm.
And also with that, I want joint goals, right? I want your goal to be my goal and vice
Mm.
versa, right?
Yeah.
With this, it's also, I mentioned before, adoption, right? If you can ensure that the business partner or the person that's actually going to bring this to life once you build it or once you deploy it, that they will adopt this and have a plan in place to adopt it, you're in a great spot.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing worse to what you're saying is we did all this work and either it's died on the vine or we actually aren't connected to the value.
Mm.
Because what can you communicate as a CDO if that's the case?
Yeah.
Right? You want to be able to communicate the wins, and these are all joint wins. I don't care who gets credit, but I want them communicated that, hey, we all came together and did this. And so
Yeah.
that idea of connecting the value starts up front. Again, there are things that that you need to do as a CDO that I know I actually have to do it and I can get it done without a lot of headaches. So I'm going to go make it happen. But other things that are much more, fundamental or impactful to the organization, you really need to understand what the value is, and
Mm.
not that, hey, this is important for customer retention,
Yeah.
right? Hey, are we going to create a competitive moat? Terrific. What does that do for us? How does that put us in a different position? You need to be comfortable having those conversations. And many business partners actually can enjoy getting engaged in that conversation as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, one of the things that I've really instituted is, and I promote this in organizations, which is don't think of me as a cost center, right? So think about cost centers. It's a tough place to be, having been
Yeah.
in a cost center role, because Jason, what they say is do more with less every year, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you've got this challenge where you're trying to transform, and it's really tough, and so if you think of yourself as a profit center, right? And I have overtly said I want revenue goals, right? I'll create them as direct, indirect, what have you, but I want the team to think about becoming a profit center. That helps you move down this path quicker and just gets people in the right mindset to
Yeah.
do this and ask those questions.
Yeah. So just a few points you've pulled out there, sort of how you connect between the work you do and the value. I think one is focusing on the value, make it about the value that you want to go after, not make it about the work that you're doing. Obviously, those two sides of the same coin. I think really interact and engage with the recipient of or the owner of the value that you're delivering, the business partner, I think you called them, but the value
Yeah.
that they're trying to get, build relationship and have a joint goal. It's a joint goal. It's not their goal that you're contributing to. It's a joint goal that you're going after. And have that kind of mindset that this is about delivering value. This isn't about building a pipeline or putting a dashboard together. This is about delivering value, and those things contribute to getting to that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll bring up one other example, which ties to your previous question in this one, which was, at Honeywell, big company, big in aerospace. As you're socializing this and as you're talking to different stakeholders, when I talked about intellectual curiosity and humility and listening, the president there had mentioned, gee whiz, we've got some challenges with pricing our maintenance contracts, right? It's a big deal in aerospace. The pricing model there makes maintenance contracts a really big deal because they want low fixed costs in the airline industry, et cetera. And so their challenge, as we talked about, I said, well, what's the issue? He said, we don't have transparency into the actual airplane and what's happening. We get
Right.
this after the fact, and it's a challenge. And I said, I think we can maybe help. I said, let's meet with the team, right? And so we met with the team and found that they didn't have good information to know where the plane is actually flying, how aggressive the pilots were flying, the type of routes they were doing. So are they flying over the Shirokos, right, in areas that have, or like the Haboobs in Arizona, particulates in the air, right? Are they in areas that have high salinity? Are they hitting brakes really hard when they land? They had no transparency to that. And so
Right.
us as CDO and the data team, we acquired a bunch of external data, right? Weather data, we got flight data, and we were actually able to give them the information they needed to actually make contracts that fit the type of customers they were using. And so
Right.
the idea of meeting with people, curiosity, spending some time, sometimes you find some really important opportunities. That was a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, right? And so
Mm.
from that point forward, you get inbound calls.
Yeah.
You know what? Hey, call Jason, right? Just see what he thinks about this, right? And
Mm.
it's a great spot to be,
Yeah.
right? So again, that idea of a profit center of getting really connected with driving the business helps. And that also then helps you again make sure that you're doing so in a very tidy and responsible way in the back end.
Yeah. I like that idea of going after meaty problems and focusing on solving the meaty problem, and then everything else sits behind it. What we're doing is solving the meaty problem. All these other things are to help us do that. And the interesting, talk a lot about integrating with business partners, integrating with the business team, working on problems together. There's a point where you obviously have to in some ways convince people that is worth invest, because there's an investment from the people that you're trying to support as well. They've got to have a leap of
Yeah.
faith that, particularly early days, that this team can help me do that. So how important does that relationship build, that stakeholder engagement, that building credibility, building buy-in thing, how important is that in sort of helping you to actually deliver value?
Yeah, huge. Um, and if you take a little step back, the best place to be as a CDO is having sponsorship in the C level, right?
Mm,
Primarily
mm,
CEO.
mm.
If you have that, right, this is you know, there's lots of ways to do this, as you said before, but having top-down support is far better than bottoms up by a
Mm,
long shot, right? And
yeah,
so you need to work at both, right? Because you want to get people focused on this hearts and minds and educate, but having the senior folks in the organization understand what you're trying to get done is really, really key. And then from there, you can engage stakeholders in a way that's meaningful.
yeah.
In addition to things that tee up making you successful, budget is really important, right?
Mm, yeah,
Innovation and roles that CDOs do, they don't really roll on a fiscal calendar, right? You need
mm,
to be, you can be thoughtful and plan out your year, but you also want to have room for being opportunistic. And so, if you are able to get discretionary budget and saying, "Hey, I want to get X number of dollars for something. I'm not sure what it is," that makes your life much, much easier to solve the problem that you brought up, which is
sure.
I'm a business partner. Gosh, I don't have enough money on my own to do this. Your reaction could be, okay, I see a similar problem over here. Let me get all of us together to triangulate this, and we'll get enough to actually get this going. Because at the end of the day, you want to cross pollinate as much as
Yeah,
possible. If I'm
yeah.
solving something here, I want it to be as extensible as possible. So, who else might value? Bringing those together is one option. In
Mm,
other cases, you could say, look, I get it. I have some funding here. I'm going to help support this and get going on it.
mm,
Or as you're actually talking to the business partner, this happened with some work that we were doing around theft for electrical supplying companies here in the U.S. It's a
right,
problem everywhere, right? But people stealing electricity, and so it's a
right.
$70 billion problem in the U.S. And so when we met with the folks trying to solve this problem, we recognized, you know what, we can actually get a whole bunch of other information here to add into your product and actually increase your ability to deploy this across many, many more providers and also with a higher level of precision. And oh, by the way, the deal, the higher the value, the more you can charge.
Mm.
We got them to go back and say, oh no, we actually are going to go and get a whole lot more money to do this because you're giving us an ability now to create a better product.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that type of engagement as well. And so lots of different ways to slice it. Although budget's always tough. Right.
Yeah.
So again, leading with the value, trying to triangulate people is really key in that arena.
Yeah, the I think coming it's interesting you went with budget when talking about stakeholder engagement, because I think you're right. Actually, the way, how you grease the wheels in a business normally is through, getting money and doing things, and getting money is a fun game in its own right. But
Yeah.
that kind of ability to be open, to say, look, let's co-invest in this thing. You've got some budget to solve the business problem. We've got some budget to contribute to, data solutions, technology solutions that allow us to do interesting things and solve problems for the business. Let's collaborate. That's brilliant. That is a great way of building a relationship, is chip in to the cash. But equally, just the ability to kind of identify, you only really get money when either you can show that there's some value, like you've done some work to prove that there's value, which is I think the best way personally. But often there's a bit of a leap of faith investment, even if there's a business case and a ROI and you've hit the kind of cutoff points for milestones of return, all this kind of thing. But there's always a bit of a leap of faith. So, but it has to be a sensible and believable and real story about the value that you're trying to deliver in order to get budget. So I love that way of using budget to kind of drive a relationship and drive your buy-in from your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. Once you get that snowball rolling, and this role is hard, right? The role of CDO is difficult, hard to define, all those good things. But once you get a bit of a reputation for saying, hey, we're able to actually help the organization in this fashion.
Yeah.
Sometimes your best friend, and I'll go back to the CFO, will be the CFO. Again, I have found them to be great supporters for folks in data, right? Because they see it. They work with data all the time. They understand quality. They understand high quality decisioning. And for a lot of companies, end of quarter, right, especially if you're public, sometimes there's money, right?
Yeah.
You want them to reach out and say, Jason, do you have any ideas on if I gave you some budget right now that you could execute on? Because I know you're creative, and I know that you have a high batting average when it comes to delivering.
Yeah.
Those are great phone calls to get. And I think as somebody that's leading data initiatives, you've got a bunch of things you're working on. I would always say, always have a couple things in your back pocket that are scoped, that if somebody came to you with some funding, that you could actually execute on, because those are just great opportunities.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that would love to be in the luxurious position of being offered money that they haven't asked for.
Yes, and it's an unusual situation. I sometimes have to slap myself because it takes you a while to get there, because usually you have a hat out.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, the meta point here is what you said before about building reputation and proving value. If you can build reputation for somebody who's able to deliver, to be innovative, to be creative, to deliver value, to do what you say you're going to do, to move at pace, then, as you say, good things come to you, and it becomes carrot rather than stick in some ways to drive. It's self-fulfilling, isn't it? You've got to deliver value to be seen as someone who can deliver value, to get some investment, to deliver more value. And when you were saying before about do more with less, really you want to be in a position to do more with more, because we're delivering value. We want to get, you earn the right to get to spend the company's money to deliver more value. But that's a tough balance to get to.
It is, and I think a big part of this is communication. Right?
Yeah.
And I have, again, communication is probably, I don't want to say where I spend or would spend the most time, but most of the people aren't spending enough time on it. And so, and communication means education, right? It means enrolling. It means sharing successes, but it also means calling things out that aren't working correctly. Right. And sharing, hey, this is where we are today.
Yeah.
Right. And being very clear on that, because it's one of the ways that you can make a mistake moving forward is being too enthusiastic about your ability to deliver when you really don't understand the environment you're in.
Yeah. Yeah, you almost lay your own landmines that you then tread on yourself if you try and push too hard and too fast.
Yeah.
I mean, just as we start to think about wrapping up, because I was gonna come to comms, because actually a lot of what you're talking about is being, an excellent communicator, or what allows you to do all those things is being an excellent communicator, or at least having excellent communication capability within your sphere of influence, so that you can put all these things in place. Do you think that the data industry, are well set up with that capability? Is it something that we've prioritized over the years, and indeed now?
I think many people have. I think it's tough for most folks because they're busy, right?
Mm,
They are really, really busy. And communication is really tough to assess the value, right? In a lot of ways. It's
mm,
a long, pardon me, it's a long pole in the tent, but it's a key part of building the brand and building some of the maturity in the organization. And
mm,
so the way I think about it is, it's really important to know where you are today in an organization, right? So what I call the point of departure. Where are you? And being very clear about that. And then being able to communicate that with a lens of saying, great, and then here's where I think we can go. And these are the
yeah,
steps we need to take to get there. Um, it is really hard to write a good email, right? So it's it's the idea of, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter. How do you come up with a very crisp message, and then how do you
mm,
communicate that
yeah,
is really important. What I would recommend to folks, if you're not great at it, that's terrific, right? You've got marketing people, you've got comms people in your organization, you've got training that's available. Enroll those folks to help you,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I've had opportunities to either hire external folks to help with this, or bring in somebody once the ball got rolling, bring in somebody really just to do communications.
yeah,
And it is money incredibly well spent, and it is time incredibly well spent. And essentially, it paves the road ahead of you,
yeah,
right? So if people know, yeah, I know what Jason's working on, it's pretty cool stuff, right? And I understand this really weird thing called data, right? Like, oh, now I get it. And everybody's got a role to play, and they're doing some things here that I see are adding business value.
yeah,
Those are great to get the organization to move with you. Again, team sport. Everybody is going to help you be successful. So you've got to enroll them early, and you also want to let them know it's money well spent for the
yeah,
organization.
yeah. No, indeed. Yeah, tell the value story. That's back to your original point. So, yeah, that's a great,
Yeah.
great pitch for comms, because starting to see this quite a lot. But Guy, amazing to have you on the show, and listen to your views and thoughts on delivering value. As I've said at the start, not as easy as it sounds. Certainly, bringing the organization along with you isn't as easy as it sounds always, and working at the pace that they can. So yeah, really appreciate your thoughts on that topic. And yeah, appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, Jason, thank you very much for the invite, and always appreciate chatting with you. And thank you again.
Yeah, no worries. And thanks everyone for listening. Hope that was enjoyable for you, and as much as it was for me. And we'll catch you again soon.